go to Taco Bell all the time, especially late at night. Being a senior in college keeps me busy with work and school, and by the time I finish my day, I'm often starving. For the past few years, grabbing food from Taco Bell has become a habit, especially after a long night of studying or work. It was about 2 months ago when something strange happened. It was around 11:30 p.m. I had just finished my shift and was feeling really hungry. The nearest Taco Bell was about 10 minutes away, so I hopped into my car and headed over. Normally, the drive-thru is open until midnight, even though they closed the lobby earlier. Lately, though, I noticed they had started closing early on some nights because they were short on staff. Still, I hoped they'd be open that night. As I pulled into the drive-thru, I noticed something odd right away. There were no other cars in line, and the lights inside the restaurant were off. This was strange because even when the lobby is closed, the drive-thru usually has some lights on. I wasn't sure if they were closed or if it was just another one of those nights when they were running short-staffed. I drove up to the speaker and rolled down my window, waiting for someone to take my order. After a few seconds of silence, I called out, "Hey, are you guys still open?" There was no reply, just more silence. I figured they must have closed early again, so I started to roll up my window and leave. Just as I was about to pull away, I heard something from the speaker. A man's voice came through, but I couldn't understand a word he was saying. It was like when someone talks too close to the phone, and their words are all muffled. It sounded strange. I asked him to repeat what he said, but this time there was no response at all. The speaker went silent again. Feeling a little unsettled, I decided it wasn't worth sticking around. I slowly drove forward through the rest of the drive-thru lane, passing the first window where you usually pay. The lights were off, and there was nobody there. As I approached the second window, I noticed something even stranger. The lights inside were off, just like the rest of the place, but there was someone standing in the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe one of the workers had stayed behind or was cleaning up. But then, as I passed by, I saw the person quickly duck down, as if they didn't want me to see them. My heart started racing because something about it felt off. And that's when I saw it. The man in the window was wearing a clown mask. The mask covered his entire face, and I couldn't see any part of his real face underneath. My gut told me to get out of there, so I drove off without thinking twice. I ended up stopping at a nearby gas station and grabbing some food instead. But even after I left, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just seen. Why was there a man wearing a clown mask inside a closed Taco Bell? It didn't make any sense, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. The next night, I found myself in the same situation. I had just finished work, and it was a little earlier this time, around 10:30 p.m. I was craving Taco Bell again, so I decided to head back and see if they were open. When I arrived, the place looked normal. There were a few cars in the drive-thru and the lights were on inside. It was like the strange event from the night before had never happened. I got in line, waited my turn, and ordered my usual. When I pulled up to the window to pay, I decided to ask the woman working about the night before. "Hey, did you guys change your hours or something?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, we still close at midnight, but last night we closed at 9 because we didn't have enough staff." That was when I told her about what I had seen. I mentioned that I had driven by the drive-thru around midnight the previous night and saw a man in the window wearing a clown mask. Her expression changed immediately. She looked surprised and a little concerned. "That's strange," she said. "I was the one who closed last night. I locked up and left at 9. There was nobody else here when I left." A chill went down my spine as I realized what that meant. If she had closed the restaurant at 9, then who had I seen at nearly midnight? Who was the man with the clown mask, standing in the window? As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I replayed the events in my head, the more unsettling it became. Who was the man in the mask? Why was he there? And what would have happened if I hadn't driven away when I did? Even now, I still don't have answers to those questions. But the experience has stuck with me, I've gone to Taco Bell a few times since then, but I'm always a little more cautious, especially when it's late at night. I haven't seen anything strange since that night, but the memory of that man in the clown mask still haunts me. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him again. I used to work at Taco Bell, and let me tell you, I've seen some strange things during my time there. I worked at a location that was about 15 minutes away from my parents' house. It was a good job for a high school senior like me, and I stayed there for a few years, through my first 2 years of college. It was mostly fun, and I made a lot of friends, but late night shifts were always a little weird. The strangest thing to ever happen to me on the job occurred during my last year working there, and I still think about it sometimes. Our Taco Bell was open until 3 a.m., and I usually worked the closing shift during the summer when I didn't have to worry about school. I didn't mind it too much, though I did see some odd stuff now and then. On this particular night, it was a Thursday, so the place had been pretty quiet for the last few hours. It was just me and my coworker, Damien, finishing up the shift. At around 2:55 a.m., literally 5 minutes before we were about to close for the night, a car pulled into the drive-thru. I was tired and ready to go home, but since we were technically still open for a few more minutes, I decided to take the order. I grabbed my headset and spoke through the drive-thru speaker. "Hi, welcome to Taco Bell. What can I get for you tonight?" I waited for a response, but nothing came through. That wasn't too unusual. Sometimes people would take a while to decide, especially this late at night. I glanced at the camera to see the car. It was just sitting there at the order box, but I noticed something strange. The driver's window was still rolled up. Usually people would have their windows down by now to talk into the speaker. I waited a little longer, starting to feel a bit impatient. It was late and I was tired. After a few more seconds, I spoke into the headset again. "If you're ready to order, please go ahead." Still no response. I looked back at the camera and finally saw the driver's window roll down. But when I looked closely, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The driver's seat was completely empty. There was no one in the car. My first thought was that maybe the driver had leaned over to grab something or was hiding for some reason. But when I checked again, there was no one in the passenger seat either. The entire front of the car was empty. At this point, I was really confused. I leaned closer to the camera, thinking maybe I had missed something, but it was clear. The driver's seat was empty, and yet the car was still sitting there. I told Damien what I was seeing, and he came over to look too. "That's weird," he said, looking at the screen. "Maybe it's some kind of prank?" I wasn't sure what to think. I spoke into the headset again. If you're going to order, you'll need to do it now because we're about to close." There was still no response. Instead, after a few more seconds of silence, the car started to slowly roll forward toward the next window. I watched it move on its own with no one behind the wheel. It was like something out of a horror movie. I told Damien, "I have no idea what's going on, but let's just close up. They're not ordering anything." Just as I said that, we both heard a loud knocking sound coming from the drive-thru window. It was 3 solid, heavy knocks, and it startled both of us. I turned to look and saw that the same car had pulled up to the window where people usually pay. The front window of the car was rolled down, but just like before, there was nobody inside. I walked over to the window, feeling uneasy, and opened it. I stuck my head out to get a better look inside the car. Once again, the driver's seat was empty, and there was no one in the passenger seat either. I even looked into the back seats, but they were empty too. At this point, I was completely freaked out. How was the car moving on its own? Who, or what, was knocking on the window? I didn't have any answers, and the whole situation was giving me chills. I quickly pulled my head back inside and closed the drive-thru window. Damien came over, just as confused as I was, and we watched as the car slowly pulled away from the window and drove off into the night. Neither of us knew what to say. We were both shaken up by what we had just seen. "Do you think it was some kind of prank?" Damien asked, but even he didn't sound convinced. I shook my head. I don't know, man. I didn't see anyone in that car. It's like it was driving by itself. We finished closing up the restaurant, but the whole time I couldn't stop thinking about that car. I had worked at Taco Bell for years and had seen some weird things during the night shifts, but this was by far the strangest. After that night, I never saw anything like it again. The car was gone, and I didn't hear about any other employees seeing anything similar. I eventually left Taco Bell and moved on to another job, but I'll always remember that night. I still don't have an explanation for what happened. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank that Damien and I just didn't figure out. Or maybe something else was going on, something I can't explain. Whatever it was, it left me with a story that I'll never forget. This story happened about 5 years ago when I went on a road trip with my friend Anna. We had been driving for hours, and as it got late into the night, we both started feeling really hungry. By this time, it was nearly midnight, and we had no idea where we were or what was around. We were driving along a freeway surrounded by fields, with no towns or buildings in sight. Anna took out her phone and started looking for places nearby where we could grab something to eat. But we were in a pretty remote area, and her phone wasn't getting much of a signal. She tried refreshing the map and searching again, but nothing seemed to load. As we kept driving for another 20 minutes, the road felt like it was stretching out forever. Finally, we spotted an exit sign. It listed a few places to eat, including a gas station and a Taco Bell. Relieved to find something, we pulled off the freeway and took the exit. When we reached the small town, we noticed that almost all the lights in the buildings were off. Everything seemed closed except for the gas station and the Taco Bell. We stopped at the gas station first to fill up the car, then we drove over to Taco Bell. There were no other cars in the parking lot, and the place looked pretty empty, but the lights were still on, so we figured it was open. We pulled into the drive-thru, ready to place our order. I started talking into the speaker to tell them what we wanted, when I suddenly heard a noise in the background. It sounded like someone was screaming for help, but the scream was cut off quickly. I paused, unsure of what I had just heard. There was silence for a few seconds, before a man's voice came through the speaker, telling us that they were closed. It seemed odd, because we had just checked the hours, and they were supposed to be open. Something didn't feel right. But I thanked him and we pulled around to the parking lot anyway, just to see if maybe we could go inside. I got out of the car and walked up to the door. The place was eerily quiet. When I peeked inside, I thought I saw someone moving around in the back, but they were out of sight. After a minute or so, a man came out to the front. He wasn't wearing a Taco Bell uniform, and his attitude was strange. He didn't seem friendly, and quickly told me they were closed. I pointed to the hours on the door, which said they should still be open, but he just shrugged and said the sign was wrong. As he started to walk away, I couldn't stop thinking about that scream I had heard earlier. So I asked him if everything was okay, and mentioned that I had heard someone yelling for help. The man stopped for a second, then gave me a small, forced smile. He said it was just one of the employees joking around and nothing to worry about. He then insisted that we should leave. Feeling uneasy, I turned to walk back toward the car. As soon as I stepped outside, I heard another scream, even louder than the first one. This time it was clear someone was yelling for help, and it sounded desperate. Before I could react, the man from inside suddenly shouted at us to get out. His voice was angry, almost threatening. Anna and I didn't wait any longer. We ran to the car, jumped inside, and quickly locked the doors. We sat there for a moment, both of us breathing heavily, unsure of what to do. I knew those screams couldn't be a joke, and the man's behavior was definitely suspicious. After a minute, we decided to call the police. We weren't sure what exactly was going on, but it felt like something was really wrong. We waited in the parking lot, nervously watching the Taco Bell, until we saw the flashing lights of a police car pull up. 2 officers got out and went inside to check things out. We watched anxiously from the car, unsure of what they would find. A few minutes later, the police officers came back out, and to our surprise, they were escorting the man we had seen earlier. He was in handcuffs. One of the officers walked over to our car and explained what had happened. Apparently, there had been 2 employees working that night when a man had come in and tried to rob the restaurant. One of the workers had struggled with him and ended up getting knocked out, while the other employee was forced into the back of the restaurant. The screams we had heard were from the worker being held in the back. When we pulled into the drive-thru, the robber was pretending to be an employee, trying to act like everything was normal. It was a terrifying realization. We had stumbled right into the middle of a robbery without even knowing it. If we hadn't called the police, who knows what might have happened. The officers thanked us for calling and told us that because we reported it, they were able to stop the man from escaping. Even though we were both shaken up, we were also relieved that the situation didn't end worse. I still think about that night sometimes, how a simple stop for food could have turned into something much more dangerous if we hadn't trusted our instincts. After everything was sorted out, the police left with the man, and we decided to get back on the road. We were too shaken to even think about getting food from anywhere else in that town. As we drove away, Anna and I couldn't stop talking about how lucky we were to have shown up when we did. It was a night we wouldn't forget anytime soon.